The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard at Buckingham Palace. Guard Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still in his iconic red tunic and bearskin hat, rifle positioned at his shoulder. Two tourists snapping photos from behind the gates, he looked like a statue. But behind his stoic expression, Marcus was counting. This was the 14th person in the last hour to mock his stance, make faces inches from his position, or try to make him laugh. Tourist behavior at Royal Guard posts had been deteriorating for years. What started as innocent photo opportunities had evolved into something far more concerning. Social media had transformed the problem into a competition. Visitors from around the world arrived with one mission: get the viral video that would make them famous. The guards were no longer seen as working soldiers, but as props in someone else's content creation. Marcus had joined the Queen's Guard 5 years earlier with pride and honor. He came from a military family where service meant something. His grandfather had stood this same post in the 1960s. And back then, visitors maintained a respectful distance. They understood these were real soldiers, performing real duties. But times had changed dramatically. Just last week, a young man had jumped the barrier and tried to grab Marcus's rifle for a photo. The incident required immediate intervention from nearby police. The tourist claimed he thought it was fake, that the whole thing was just for show. He genuinely seemed surprised when officers detained him. The video of his arrest got 3 million views. Its comments debating whether the guards were too sensitive. Marcus's colleague, Guard Sarah Chen, had experienced worse. A group of teenagers surrounded her position, screaming and waving their arms, trying to break her concentration. When she remained motionless, one of them touched her face. The physical contact violated every protocol and crossed a serious line. Sarah had years of military training and incredible self-control. That moment tested every ounce of her discipline. The incidents weren't isolated to Buckingham Palace. At Windsor Castle, guards reported similar problems. At the Tower of London, the situation had become so challenging that additional security measures were being discussed. Management kept telling the guards to maintain composure, that it was part of the job, that tourists brought economic value. But the guards knew something had to change. What most visitors didn't understand was that these weren't actors or performers. Every guard standing at these historic posts was an active duty soldier. Many had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, or other conflict zones. They had real military training, real responsibilities, and real authority. The ceremonial aspect of their role didn't diminish their operational capacity or their status as serving members of the British Armed Forces. Marcus thought about this disconnect constantly during his shifts. He had spent 8 months in Helmand Province before this posting. He had faced actual danger, made life-or-death decisions, and earned his position through merit and sacrifice. Now, he stood watching people treat him like an amusement park attraction. The irony wasn't lost on him. The palace had implemented various measures over the years. Additional barriers were installed. Warning signs were posted in multiple languages. Security personnel increased their presence. But nothing seemed to work. The disrespect continued escalating. Fueled by the desire for unique content and the anonymity that crowds provided, what troubled Marcus most was how children were being taught to behave. He watched parents encourage their kids to get close, to try to make the guard react, to treat the situation like a game. These parents were raising a generation that saw uniformed service members as entertainment rather than protectors. The cultural shift worried him deeply. During breaks, the guards would share stories. Everyone had their collection of outrageous encounters. There was the woman who tried to feed Marcus a sandwich, insisting he must be hungry. The man who proposed to his girlfriend directly in front of Sarah's post, then got angry when she didn't smile for their photos. The group who brought a speaker and started dancing. It's blocking the entire pathway. But recently, something had shifted in the guards' conversations. The frustration was reaching a breaking point. Years of accumulated disrespect were weighing on morale. Officers who once loved their posts were requesting transfers. Recruitment for ceremonial duties was becoming difficult because word spread about the challenges. Marcus knew the brass was monitoring the situation. There had been closed-door meetings about protocols and responses. Legal teams were reviewing what guards could and couldn't do. Public relations experts were analyzing potential consequences of various actions. Everyone could feel something building, a tension that would eventually need release. On this particular morning, as Marcus stood his post, he noticed the crowd was larger than usual. Tour buses had arrived simultaneously, creating a surge of visitors. The noise level increased. People jostled for position near the gates. Someone's selfie stick extended dangerously close to his face. Marcus maintained his discipline, but his mind was active. He thought about his training, his responsibilities, and his limits. He wondered how much longer this could continue before something significant happened. He wasn't alone in these thoughts. Every guard at every post across London was thinking the same thing. The tradition of the Queen's Guard stretched back centuries. It represented continuity, stability, and British heritage. These soldiers stood as living symbols of dedication and service. But symbols are only meaningful when they're respected. And respect was becoming increasingly rare as the morning progressed and the crowd grew thicker. Marcus sensed that something was different about today. The energy felt charged, unpredictable. He couldn't have known that within hours. An incident would occur that would change everything about how Royal Guards interacted with tourists. The waiting was almost over. The incident began just before noon when a group of university students from California approached the palace gates. They had been traveling across Europe for 3 weeks, documenting everything for their combined social media following of over 500,000 people. Their content strategy was simple: push boundaries, create controversy, and generate engagement through increasingly outrageous behavior. Their leader, a communications major named Tyler, had been planning this moment for weeks. He had watched dozens of videos showing tourists interacting with guards. He studied which actions generated the most views and shares. He concluded that nobody had gone far enough. Everyone did the same tired routine of making faces or standing next to the guards. Tyler wanted something memorable, something that would truly go viral. The group positioned themselves near Guard Thompson's post, setting up their equipment with practiced efficiency. They had a professional camera, a ring light, and a microphone. This wasn't casual tourism anymore. This was content creation with production value. They treated it like a business operation. Tyler started with standard approaches, narrating for his camera about the famous guards and their traditions. But his tone carried mockery rather than respect. He described them as robots, as government-paid statues, as tourist attractions maintained for economic purposes. His friends laughed at his commentary, encouraging him to push further. What happened next crossed every line. Tyler began a routine he had apparently rehearsed. He started mimicking Marcus's stance, moving progressively closer with each repetition. His friends filmed from multiple angles, ensuring they captured every moment. The crowd around them grew, sensing something unusual was developing. Marcus remained motionless, following his training. But internally, his awareness sharpened. Years of military experience had taught him to assess threats and recognize when situations were escalating. This wasn't playful ignorance anymore. This was deliberate provocation, and it was being broadcast live. Tyler's performance intensified. He began making physical contact, first brushing against Marcus's uniform, then attempting to adjust his bearskin hat. The crowd gasped. Some people started recording on their own phones, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. A few tourists looked uncomfortable, sensing this had gone too far. But nobody intervened. Sarah Chen, stationed 30 feet away, noticed the situation developing. She couldn't break her own stance, but she made eye contact with the roaming security officer. Protocol required guards to remain at their posts unless facing immediate physical danger or receiving direct orders. But protocols were written before the social media age. Before this level of public harassment became normalized, Tyler's friends were ecstatic. Their view counts were climbing rapidly. Comments flooded in, mostly encouraging more extreme behavior. The algorithm was rewarding them for controversy, and they responded by escalating further. Tyler produced a marker and reached toward Marcus's uniform, apparently planning to write something. This was the moment everything changed. This was when years of accumulated frustration, thousands of individual instances of disrespect, and the breaking point of professional soldiers merged into action. Marcus's voice cut through the courtyard like a rifle shot. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." The command wasn't shouted in anger, but delivered with absolute military authority. The volume and tone were specifically trained for combat situations, designed to immediately establish control and compliance. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Tyler stumbled backward, nearly dropping his marker. The crowd fell completely silent. Every phone camera continued recording, but now they were capturing something different than expected. They were documenting the moment when a professional soldier reminded everyone of his actual role and authority. Marcus took one deliberate step forward, a movement allowed within his protocols when facing direct interference. His voice remained controlled, but carried unmistakable command. "This is a military installation. Step behind the barrier immediately." Sarah Chen, witnessing the situation, made her own decisive move. She stamped her foot with enough force that the sound echoed across the courtyard, then executed a precise turn toward the disturbance. This coordinated response between guards was something rarely seen but always impressive when it occurred. Additional guards began converging from other posts, following their protocols for mutual support. Within seconds, 4 uniformed soldiers had created a controlled perimeter. They moved with the precision of their military training, transforming from static posts into an active security formation. The palace security team arrived simultaneously. Having been monitoring the situation through cameras, they had been waiting for the right moment to intervene, and the guards' actions provided the perfect justification. Tyler and his friends suddenly found themselves surrounded by actual authority rather than the passive targets they had expected. Tyler tried to maintain his composure, still filming, attempting to frame himself as the victim of aggressive soldiers, but his hands were shaking, and his voice had lost its confident mockery. He started explaining that he was just having fun, that he didn't mean any harm, that surely everyone understood it was just content creation. Marcus's response was measured but firm. He explained that interfering with a soldier on duty was a serious offense. He noted that physical contact with military personnel and equipment violated multiple laws. He informed Tyler that his actions were being reviewed for potential charges. Every word was professional, controlled, and legally precise. The crowd's reaction shifted dramatically. Initial gasps of surprise transformed into murmurs of approval. People who had been laughing moments earlier now looked embarrassed. Parents pulled their children back from the barriers. The mood had changed completely. Tyler's friends stopped filming their own content and started deleting footage, suddenly aware they had documented their own potentially criminal behavior. They tried to blend back into the crowd, but security had already identified them. There would be no escaping the consequences of their actions. What Tyler and his group failed to understand until this moment was that these guards weren't performers who had to tolerate everything. They were soldiers with real authority, operating under military law, empowered to respond when their duties were compromised. The viral moment they wanted was happening, but not in the way they had planned. Within minutes of the confrontation, palace security had escorted Tyler and his group to a holding area for questioning. Their expensive camera equipment was confiscated as evidence. Their live stream had been abruptly cut off, leaving thousands of viewers confused about what happened. But dozens of other tourists had captured the entire incident from different angles, and those videos were already spreading across the internet. Marcus returned to his post. His heart rate elevated, but his expression controlled. Years of training helped him process the adrenaline and refocus on his duties. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in months, he felt the dignity of his position had been defended rather than compromised. He wasn't alone in this feeling. Across the various Royal Guard posts throughout London, word spread quickly through internal communication channels. The incident at Buckingham Palace became immediate news among the guards. Text messages flew between off-duty soldiers, and those currently on post maintained awareness of the developing situation. Everyone understood this was a defining moment. The palace's legal team assembled rapidly. They reviewed footage from security cameras and confiscated devices. They They examined protocols and regulations. What they found supported the guards' actions completely. Tyler had committed multiple offenses, including interfering with military personnel, trespassing beyond designated areas, and potentially assaulting a service member. The evidence was overwhelming and documented from numerous angles. Public reaction on social media moved through distinct phases. Initially, Tyler's followers defended him, claiming the guards had overreacted. But as more complete footage emerged showing the full extent of his behavior, opinion shifted dramatically. People who had never thought deeply about Royal Guards suddenly became vocal defenders of their right to respect and safety. A retired sergeant major posted a detailed explanation of what guards endure daily. His thread went viral, accumulating hundreds of thousands of shares. He explained the military background of these soldiers, their training, their service records, and the serious nature of their duties. He provided context that most tourists never considered, humanizing the guards in ways the public hadn't previously encountered. News outlets picked up the story within hours. British tabloids ran headlines about tourists getting what they deserved. International media covered it as a cultural clash between social media culture and traditional institutions. Television programs invited military experts to discuss the appropriate boundaries for tourist behavior at ceremonial sites. The palace's public relations team faced a decision. They could downplay the incident, apologize for any perceived aggression, and try to smooth things over. Or they could support the guards publicly, potentially risking some tourist satisfaction but establishing clear boundaries for future behavior. After careful consideration, they chose the latter approach. The official statement was precise and unapologetic. It acknowledged the incident, confirmed that the guards had acted appropriately within their protocols, and emphasized that these were active military personnel deserving of respect. It announced that security measures would be enhanced, and that disruptive behavior would result in immediate removal and potential prosecution. The tone was professional but firm. This official support energized the guards across all posts. For years, they had felt their concerns were secondary to tourist experience and economic considerations. Now, their organization was publicly backing their right to maintain dignity and safety while performing their duties. Morale improved noticeably overnight. Tyler and his friends faced immediate consequences. Palace authorities pressed charges for interference with military personnel. Their university was notified of their behavior abroad. Sponsors who had supported their social media content began distancing themselves, not wanting association with the negative publicity. The viral moment they craved had arrived, but it destroyed, rather than enhanced their reputations, more significantly. The incident sparked a broader conversation about tourist behavior at cultural and historical sites worldwide. Museums, monuments, and ceremonial locations in dozens of countries reported similar escalating problems with visitor conduct. The Buckingham Palace incident became a catalyst for re-evaluating how these spaces were managed and protected. Within days, new protocols were implemented at royal sites across London. Additional barriers were installed, creating more distance between tourists and guards. Warning signs became more explicit about potential consequences for disruptive behavior. Security personnel received updated training on when and how to intervene more quickly. The entire approach to managing tourist interactions evolved rapidly. The guards themselves received updated guidance on their authority to respond. While maintaining their traditional stoic presence, they were now empowered to issue verbal commands more readily when situations warranted. The threshold for what constituted unacceptable behavior was clarified and lowered. The message was clear. Respect would no longer be optional. Marcus found himself unexpectedly at the center of attention. Media requests for interviews flooded in. He declined them all, maintaining the professional discretion expected of active military personnel. But within the guard community, he became a symbol of the change everyone had wanted. His calm, controlled response to provocation represented the ideal balance of discipline and self-respect. Sarah Chen and the other guards who supported Marcus during the incident were quietly commended by their commanding officers. The coordinated response demonstrated excellent judgment and teamwork. It showed that guards could maintain their ceremonial dignity while also protecting themselves and their positions when necessary. The incident's video footage became training material. New guards learned from it, studying how Marcus assessed the situation, chose the appropriate moment to respond, and delivered commands with authority. It illustrated the difference between tolerating minor annoyances and addressing serious violations. The distinction was important for guards to understand. International. Tourist organizations began including sections in their travel guides about appropriate behavior at ceremonial military sites. What had been vague suggestions about being respectful became specific guidelines about physical boundaries, photography restrictions, and potential legal consequences for violations. The educational approach improved significantly. Some tourism industry professionals worried that stricter enforcement would damage London's reputation as a welcoming destination. But data showed the opposite effect. Respectful tourists appreciated the enhanced order and dignity. Families felt safer bringing children to sites where behavior standards were clearly maintained. The quality of the visitor experience actually improved when disruptive elements were removed. The ripple effects of the incident continued expanding in unexpected ways. 3 days after the confrontation, a major tourism website published survey results showing that 78% of visitors supported the guards' right to enforce respectful behavior. The silent majority, who had always treated the guards properly, finally had a voice in the conversation. Tyler faced prosecution under British law. His case moved through the legal system quickly due to the overwhelming evidence. His defense attorney argued for leniency, claiming cultural misunderstanding and youthful poor judgment. But the prosecutor countered that this was deliberate. Planned harassment of military personnel, captured and broadcast intentionally. The judge sided with the prosecution. The sentence included a substantial fine, a ban from all royal properties for 10 years, and a requirement to complete community service, specifically working with veterans organizations. The judge explained that Tyler needed to understand the real people behind the uniforms he had mocked. The sentence aimed for education rather than pure punishment. But its severity sent a clear message. Tyler's public apology, posted on his social media accounts, went viral for different reasons than his original content. He expressed genuine remorse, acknowledged his privilege and ignorance, and described what he had learned about military service through his mandated community work. Some viewed it as sincere growth. Others saw it as damage control. Regardless, it became part of the broader conversation about respect and consequences. His friends faced lesser charges, but similar educational requirements. Their universities imposed additional disciplinary measures, including suspension of study abroad privileges. The academic consequences surprised them more than the legal ones. They had treated their trip as an extended vacation, but learned that their behavior reflected on their institutions and could impact their educational futures. Meanwhile, changes at the royal sites continued accelerating. Technology played an increasing role in managing tourist behavior. Facial recognition systems identified individuals who had been previously removed for disruptive conduct. If they returned, security was immediately alerted. The systems raised privacy concerns, but the palace argued they were necessary for protecting both guards and well-behaved visitors. Guard training programs were updated to include enhanced modules on de-escalation techniques and verbal commands. While guards had always received military training, the specific challenges of ceremonial duties in tourist-heavy environments required specialized skills. The curriculum now reflected this reality, preparing guards for the unique pressures of their roles. Marcus continued his duties with renewed confidence. The support from leadership and the public response to the incident validated his actions. He noticed immediate changes in tourist behavior at his post. People maintained respectful distances, asked permission before taking close photos, and educated their children about proper conduct. The shift was remarkable and sustained. Other guards reported similar improvements. The incident had reset expectations across all royal sites. What had become normalized over years of gradual deterioration reversed almost overnight. Visitors understood there were boundaries and consequences. The guards felt their positions had regained appropriate dignity and authority. International. Media coverage brought perspectives from around the world. Japanese news outlets contrasted British tourist behavior with the strict etiquette expected at imperial sites in Tokyo. French commentators discussed how the Republican Guard at the LEC Palace managed similar challenges. Italian journalists examined protocols at Vatican City. The conversation became global, with different cultures sharing approaches to balancing accessibility with respect. Some commentators criticized what they viewed as excessive authority and militarization of tourist spaces. They argued that public sites should tolerate disruption as the price of openness and accessibility. These voices generated debate, but remained in the minority. Most people recognized the distinction between welcoming visitors and accepting harassment of working soldiers. The incident influenced policy discussions beyond tourism. Military organizations worldwide examined how their ceremonial units were treated and protected. Veterans groups advocated for greater recognition of the real military status of guards performing public duties. The conversation expanded to encompass broader questions about how societies value and respect military service. Sarah Chen was interviewed by military publications about her experiences as a female guard. She discussed the additional challenges women faced, including more frequent physical boundary violations and inappropriate comments. Her candid accounts contributed to policy changes, specifically addressing gender-based harassment at ceremonial posts. The palace's decision to publicly support the guard's actions influenced other institutions facing similar challenges. Museums dealing with visitors touching artifacts, zoos managing people, harassing animals, and cultural sites experiencing disrespectful photography all took note. The incident provided a template for how organizations could set and enforce boundaries without apologizing for protecting their core missions. Tourist operators began incorporating guard etiquette into their pre-tour briefings. What had been overlooked or treated casually became emphasized and explained. Guides spent time helping visitors understand who the guards were, what they did, and why respect mattered. Education proved more effective than enforcement alone. Though both were necessary, the economic impact was carefully monitored. Initial concerns about reduced tourist interest proved unfounded. Visitor numbers remained strong, but the quality of interactions improved. Guards reported feeling safer and more respected. The work environment became more sustainable, reducing stress and improving retention in ceremonial positions. Marcus's family, particularly his grandfather who had served in the same role decades earlier, expressed pride in how the situation was handled. His grandfather shared stories of different times when respect was automatic and violations were rare. The conversation across generations highlighted how much had changed and how important it was to reclaim appropriate standards. The incident became a case study in multiple fields. Business schools examined it through the lens of organizational culture and employee protection. Communications programs analyzed the social media dynamics and viral spread. Military academies incorporated it into discussions about maintaining discipline in non-combat situations. Its educational value extended far beyond the immediate circumstances. 6 months after the incident, the changes at Royal Guard posts had become thoroughly institutionalized. What began as a response to one confrontation had evolved into comprehensive reform of how ceremonial military sites operated and interacted with the public. The transformation was measurable and significant. Tourist satisfaction surveys showed interesting results. Overall ratings for visits to royal sites had actually increased, despite or perhaps because of the stricter behavioral standards. Families particularly appreciated the more orderly environment. Educational groups valued the enhanced dignity of the experience. The data contradicted fears that enforcing respect would diminish visitor enjoyment. Marcus was promoted, eventually rotated to a different assignment, but his legacy at Buckingham Palace endured. New guards arriving for ceremonial duty learned his story as part of their orientation. He represented a turning point, a moment when soldiers performing public-facing roles reclaimed their authority and dignity. His name became synonymous with professional response to provocation. The guards themselves reported dramatically improved job satisfaction. Retention rates increased. Applications for ceremonial positions rose. What had been viewed as a challenging assignment became desirable again. The work environment transformation had real effects on recruitment and morale across the organization. Tyler completed his community service requirement, working with wounded veterans. The experience genuinely changed his perspective. He began creating different content, focusing on veteran issues and military family challenges. His platform, once built on mockery and boundary pushing, shifted toward advocacy and education. Whether motivated by genuine growth or strategic rebranding, the result was positive content reaching his substantial audience. The legal precedent established by his case influenced subsequent prosecutions. Other tourists who crossed lines faced similar charges and sentences. Courts demonstrated consistent willingness to protect military personnel performing ceremonial duties. The legal framework supporting Guard authority became well established and regularly enforced. International cooperation on tourist behavior standards increased. UNESCO World Heritage Sites shared best practices. Military ceremonial units from different countries exchanged protocols and training materials. A global network emerged focused on maintaining dignity and safety at culturally significant locations while remaining accessible to respectful visitors. Technology continued evolving to support behavioral management. Artificial intelligence systems analyzed crowd dynamics and predicted potential problems before they escalated. Automated announcements reminded visitors of proper conduct in multiple languages. Digital signage displayed rules clearly and prominently. The infrastructure supporting respectful tourism became more sophisticated. Sarah, Chen, and other guards who experienced the transition from the old environment to the new one became advocates for continued vigilance. They warned against complacency, knowing that standards could erode again if not actively maintained. Their voices kept the conversation alive within military and palace leadership. Ensuring lessons learned weren't forgotten, the incident's video footage remained online. Viewed millions of times across various platforms, comment sections showed overwhelming support for the guards, with occasional dissenting voices arguing various positions. The footage served as a permanent reminder of the confrontation and its consequences. New generations of tourists encountered it while researching their visits. Shaping their expectations before arrival, academic researchers studied the incident's broader implications for public space management in the social media age. Papers were published examining the intersection of military tradition, tourist economics, and digital culture. The scholarship contributed to understanding how societies navigate tensions between accessibility and respect, documentation and disruption, tradition and modernity. Marcus occasionally reflected on that morning when Tyler approached his post. He thought about how different his response might have been just months earlier. When guards felt less supported and more constrained, the timing had been crucial. Frustration had reached critical mass. Leadership was ready to act, and public sentiment was shifting. All these factors aligned to make meaningful change possible. The broader cultural conversation about respect for military service members, regardless of their current assignment, gained momentum partly because of this incident. People began questioning assumptions that ceremonial roles were less important or less serious than combat positions. Understanding grew that soldiers serving in public-facing capacities carried the same training, dedication, and authority as those in any other military role. Tourist education programs, implemented based on lessons from the incident, proved remarkably effective. When people understood the context, history, and human reality behind the traditions they were observing, behavior improved dramatically. Ignorance, not malice, drove most problematic conduct. Addressing that ignorance prevented problems more effectively than any security measure. The palace's gift. Shops began selling educational materials about the guards, their history, and their role. These materials presented information respectfully and accessibly, helping visitors appreciate what they were witnessing. The commercial aspects supported the educational mission, creating a sustainable model for promoting understanding. Guard welfare programs expanded based on recognition that ceremonial duties carried unique stresses. Access to counseling increased. Peer support networks strengthened. Leadership demonstrated ongoing commitment to protecting those performing these challenging public roles. The organizational culture shift extended beyond incident response to preventive care and sustained support. Looking back, historians would likely mark this incident as a pivotal moment in the evolution of ceremonial military traditions in the modern era. It demonstrated that ancient practices could adapt without abandoning core principles. It showed that respect and accessibility weren't mutually exclusive. It proved that clear boundaries, properly explained and consistently enforced, enhanced rather than diminished public experiences. Marcus Thompson eventually retired from active service and occasionally spoke at military events about his experiences. He always emphasized that the incident wasn't about one tourist or one moment, but about years of accumulated frustration finding resolution. He credited his fellow guards' supportive leadership in changing public attitudes for making sustainable improvement possible. The Queen's Guard continued standing their posts across London, maintaining traditions stretching back centuries, but they did so now with renewed confidence, clearer authority, and stronger support. They remain symbols of continuity and dedication, but also real soldiers, deserving and receiving appropriate respect. The balance had been restored, and vigilance ensured it remained that way. Tourists continued arriving in massive numbers, cameras ready, eager to witness these iconic figures. But they came now with better understanding, clearer expectations, and more respectful behavior. The experience was richer for everyone involved. Tradition and modernity had found a sustainable coexistence. One confrontation on one morning had catalyzed the transformation. Everyone needed, but nobody quite knew how to achieve until it happened.